Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are again, looking back on a set that's passed a little while ago, looking for budget cards and budget staples we might be able to pick up to get, to help us build budget decks or just any deck in general. I generally make these towards, cards that are under $1 or less, but with some attention to cards that get close to that amount, or cards that I think you absolutely should pick up. I will say, I didn't quite remember Brothers War, looking back on it, and so I started looking through, Scryfall to find the cards in it, and then I remembered why I didn't quite remember Brothers War. There's really not much in this set that really catches my eye, and it feels like the good cards are very expensive, like very, very expensive, at like some cards being upwards of $20 for no other reason, I think, than that the set needs a reason to be opened. So, kind of a strange set, but I did find a good handful of cards that I wanted to share with you guys as cards I think are really interesting. If you're building, like I said, if you're building $50 decks, $100 decks, some of these cards are going to be very, very useful. All right, let's get right into it. So starting with the main set and white. Recommission is a pretty straightforward card. Now, to me, this is so straightforward that I almost didn't want to put this on the list. At like under 20 cents, it's a really good reanimation card in white. Very good in mono white decks or artifact decks with white in them, mirror decks or any other small kind of like aristocratic artifact decks. This is engine decks even. This is just a generally good card. Now granted, I think the premium of reanimating a 3 mana or less card has, gone from 2 mana to 1 mana in white recently, with I think like Helping Hands, but its ability to get an artifact, I think, is the main kind of draw of this card. I've used it to bring back like Ashnod's Altar, Shadow Spears, things like that, which I think is definitely more powerful than just a simple reanimation card, which this also tends to be. So right off the bat, I think this is a very strong card. If you haven't picked up like a few copies, I would. At this price, having 5 or 6 laying around is not a problem. Moving on, we have kind of a weird one in white. This is Platoon Dispenser. Now, this is one of those mythics that's under $1, and this set does have a lot of mythics that are very, very cheap. I think like the red-green worm mythic was like 33 cents, and I almost put it on this list because I was, flabbergasted at that price, but it's such a bad card that it kind of deserves that price. Platoon Dispenser is interesting to me because it is a, not mono white, but a white card draw effect that is just kind of held back, that they made the mana cost and the body a little too big, and if it was just a smaller creature, it would have been better. But the way I look at it is, if you're in like mono white ramp with artifacts, or mono white artifacts, or any form of like tokens deck, and you're playing on a really, really hard budget, you're kind of hard up on finding card draw, and Platoon Dispenser at 5 mana, but immediately drawing you a card at the end of the turn is really, really good. After that, it functions as a mana sink, and later in the game, you could reanimate it once to just draw, an extra card. And attack with a 4/6, to be fair. Is this really, really strong? I don't know, but for card advantage in like mono white artifacts on a budget, this is a card I would very much so consider. It's okay, but I think it's interesting. At a 4/6 in white like this, I think it's just an interesting card. You don't see stuff like this all the time. All right, let's move right into blue. Hurkyl is a really deceptively good card. I think the main reason nobody really uses her is because this kind of horrendous text box that just feels so much more complicated than it is. But really what she does is basically, how do we sum it up? I think the best way I would think of her is that if you've cast an instant this turn, when she's out, at the end of the turn, you look at the top 5 to put an instant into your hand. Then for each additional card type, let's say sorcery, let's say, because it's non-creature, right? So instant sorcery, enchantments, and artifacts are probably what you're going to hit. You could actually pick another card out of there if you had cast that type. So I think this is clunky, but if you stop trying to min-max this, right? I think there's this idea, you look at Hurkyl and you're like, Okay, so if I cast an instant, a sorcery, and an artifact in this turn, I look at the top 5, and all 3 of those are within that top 5, I draw 3. Wow, that's a bit much, I think. I think instead we should just look at Hurkyl as like in a spell, like a spell-based deck, you know, with like a magecraft ability almost, like where what we do is we just think about instants and sorceries. And Hurkyl says at the end of the turn, if you cast an instant or sorcery, you'll probably draw a card from your top 5. And is that good enough? I kind of think so. I think like in a very budget or even like medium budget, you know, dedicated instant or sorcery deck, Hurkyl's ability to draw, not only dig, but draw that card at the end of your turn is really, really good. That's not including the fact she's a 2/4, she blocks well, you know, 3 damage won't kill her, so bolts and like Anger of the Gods, she'll dodge. I think this is a pretty decent card, honestly, at this price. And if you're playing like something kind of a little juicier too, like if you're already manipulating the top of your deck, or you're already in like a good even split of instants and sorceries, she just gets better. So I think the floor is good on her, and the ceiling is really good. So if she was like 2 mana, I think it wouldn't even be a question, but at 3 mana, she's just a little high costed, and I don't think I'd use her as a commander, but I think she's really good, and at 15 cents, like, fits into any like $50, you know, spell deck very easily. Looking at another Hurkyl card, Hurkyl's Final Meditation is a very strange card. You can get it for 9 cents. That's really funny to me, and I get why. This is a clumsy spell. This is a 7 mana spell that's actually a 10 mana spell, but it's really, really powerful, right? It's an evacuation that hits all permanents and ends the turn of the player whose turn it is. Now, I would probably only use this on my opponent's turns, and I would only use this as kind of a finisher, and much like Hurkyl, like a very spell-heavy kind of, you know, I don't know exactly what you would do, maybe a ramp deck or something like that, where you can use this as your big cast, bounce a bunch of permanents back into your hand, go to your turn because you've ended your last opponent's turn, replay all of those, get a bunch of benefits, and yeah, like, and just rinse and repeat. Now, I think this is also notable as one of those end the turn slash, end the turn slash take another turn effects that doesn't exile itself. So if you have the means, you can keep putting this back into your hand and keep casting it. Obviously, it's not as good when you cast it on your own turn, but it's still an interesting card. Is this going to go into any deck I'll ever build? Probably not, but at 9 cents, if you are building a super, super budget commander and you want a silly finisher that literally no one will see coming, I think this is worth considering it. But it's close, I would say. Looking at black, there's only a single card that caught my eye, and it's technically more of an artifact, and can be played colorless, but you need that black color identity. It's Transmorgan's Crown. And I like Transmorgan's Crown because it's kind of a bad Skull Clamp, and Skull Clamp is so good that I'm okay playing a kind of bad Skull Clamp. I will note the +2/+0 is sometimes relevant. I play this like in Mono Black Ashnod, or I might play this in like any kind of artifact aristocrats or token aristocrats deck, where just for 1 black mana you draw a card as long as you have tokens and you have a sack outlet, which is pretty good if you ask me. So I think this is a fine card. It's nice as a option in low power or in budget, where you can just use this to kind of get ahead and like spend a turn drawing cards. Is it just kind of a clunky greed? I guess it can be, but if you're already using like Blood Artists and other like Blood Artist effects to take advantage of deaths, this just kind of becomes gravy on top, and for that reason I really like it, especially at that price. And I should look up, Skull Clamp nowadays is, yeah, about $7. So definitely, if you are in some kind of budget deck, Transmorgan's Crown is just really, really worth grabbing as a budget inclusion. And otherwise, I think it's a decent card. Moving on to red, Mechanized Warfare at 50 cents, maybe about $1 sometimes. This is an interesting card. I don't think a lot of damage doublers or damage addition cards can be picked up for less than $1. And Mechanized Warfare is really unique because it specifically says red or artifact. Usually these either say all sources and they're very difficult, like they're very expensive, or they're specifically just red or just non-combat damage, at least if memory serves. So this is unique that it uses artifacts or red. Now, obviously this is better in like a mono red artifacts deck, but I think it's still good enough that if the majority of your deck is based around artifacts, Mechanized Warfare is a pretty big boost. I would say also if you consider it with like cards like Impact Tremors as well. Like if you think of this in a, like, once again, I tend to think Mirror for like low mana artifact Kindred, but like if you have like an artifact creatures deck, right? And you have Mechanized Warfare, this not only boosts the power of all of your artifact creatures, but it also works with something like Impact Tremors or like Goblin Bombardment, right? Where they are cards that aren't your artifact, like, battle team. I don't know what to call it. They're not part of your army, but they're a critical part of your damage, and Mechanized Warfare just helps both sides. So if you're in a budget deck, this is really good, but in a slightly stronger deck, I don't think this is a bad card at all. This represents so much damage over time, and like notably also isn't like, it doesn't double damage from your opponent's side either. I think this is just a really, really strong card, and is kind of surprising that you can get it for so cheap. So if you're building within those frames, I think this is a great card. And I think, I'm just gonna pause here to point out, I think one of the things that makes Brothers War so difficult to brew with is it's so into like the whole artifacts, power stones, and that kind of strategy, that it's almost like parasitic. Like it doesn't give anything to any other strategies mostly. And though we might say like the old Mirrodin packs or Mirrodin sets were similar, I think they just offered enough of power to make up for it that we didn't notice. Whereas I really feel like Brothers War is all in on these kind of very niche strategies. Going into green, this is a card I remember coming out and people were excited for, and I picked up a copy and I assumed it would be worth a few dollars, and it never was. Fade from History is a card that really catches my eye. Like, it's such a powerful board clear style effect, and I just never see it. Maybe I just hang out in the wrong play groups, which might be true, but I just don't see this card. And you know, I think of it as kind of like a rest in peace card. If you're in mono green or like green with only a few colors, you're not really playing enchantments or artifacts, Fade from History is almost a free include, because on the right boards, it can do so much damage. If one player is on treasures, if you have like an enchantment deck around, if someone's playing like, I don't know, any form of engine deck with artifacts, this can be just devastating to them. But I think even if you are playing enchantments or artifacts, you might still want to consider this. Like, most green decks tend to forego artifact, like mana rocks mostly, because they can just use ramp to do so. So if you take out a lot of the mana rocks, which even then you might be good to get rid of them, and you leave just a few things, and then you're playing against opponents who are playing like Phyrexian Arenas, you're playing Smothering Tides, or literally anything, right? You're going to be really happy to cast this and exchange mana rocks or like one or two artifacts or enchantments to wipe the board. So this is a card that just catches me as being underplayed, and I think it's very good. Especially if you're in green, you don't really care if your opponents get 2/2s. Like, it's not really going to change much. And I think the card advantage by blowing up so many, you know, important permanents is just going to be really good for you. So I think if you're in budgets, this is a really easy pickup, and otherwise, I think this is a fine pickup depending on your playgroup. Here's Cradle Clearcutter. This is I'm definitely gonna get some looks for this one. Okay, I just want to note how cheap this effect is, and so unless you're building $50 or less, you probably don't want this. But this ability of adding an amount of mana, especially green here, that like to the creature's power, is not something you see often. And when you do see it, it tends to be on 3 mana creatures, I'm pretty sure almost exclusively. So despite what it looks like, this creature is just appropriately costed for this ability. Now, it has no other abilities because its backside, its main like other side is that you can cast it for 6 as a 3/6. But I'm going to suggest if you're like playing really budget +1/+1 counters, or any form of like auras or any form of boost cards, Cradle Clear Cutter is pretty good, because as soon as you give it a +1/+1 counter, it becomes pretty well statted and tapping for 2. And then if you're in a +1/+1 counter deck, you should probably get a few other counters on it, and all of a sudden it's tapping for quite a bit of mana. And at under 25 cents, it's a really, really good inclusion. I find that a lot of like the +1/+1 this is going to be a horrible search. A lot of the +1/+1 cards, like a lot of the core cards of +1/+1 counters, tend to be very expensive. And so I'm looking for Kami of Whispered Hopes. If this is comparable, yeah, you can see that this is $2. Like, this is the superior card in comparison. And if you are not playing on a budget, this is the choice you'll make. But because it's also taps for any color. But if you are on a budget, I think I would consider Cradle Clear Cutter, you know, just as an option to play with. It's just really, really cool and does something with cheap decks that you can't do otherwise. All right, moving on to the commander cards, we're going to go up in power considerably. I do feel kind of bad. These Brothers War cards are just kind of really, really weak generally, but I think they're worth pointing out. And these commander cards, I think I have 3 of them, maybe 4, are really interesting because I think they're considerably stronger. Disciple of Kalis Nin. This is a less than 25-cent card I'd never heard of. This is a 5 mana, 3/4 ETB. Each player phases out all permanents except for 5, and then you keep the Disciple and 5 of your own permanents. And then it says permanents can't phase in. Is this a good card? I don't know. It's definitely a strong card. It's a very specific card to like what your meta is, what your deck is. It does something that's very, very hard to replicate. And even if we were going to be really like, you know, try to figure out what makes it strong, the thing that I want to bring attention to is that this is one of those the few cards that doesn't say non-land, right? This is 5 permanents. So when you play Disciple, players lose their lands to a certain extent. If they play tokens or something, they lose a lot, but otherwise people are all losing things. And you don't see this kind of, I don't even think it's a tax effect. You just don't see this effect hitting lands anymore. So it's really, really rare to see this. The fact that you keep her and she's a 3/4 is also really impressive. I think this is a very interesting card. Now, I don't know what I play this in, right? I'm not sure if this is like one of those things where I'm trying to, like, you can't make it better, right? If you blink her, if you make a copy of her, sorry, this is catching me. 5 permanents you control. Oh yeah, it doesn't change anything because all they do is go down 1 or 2, right, sorry. So no matter what, your opponents are left with 5. So if you blink, if you add another copy, they're just going to be left at 5. So this is kind of a card you play once, and then you try to take advantage of in order to win the game. And I wonder, in a game like this, do you just phase out all your lands and keep all of your beaters and see what your opponents do? At worst, they kill the Disciple and all of your lands phase back in, right? I don't know. This is just, I just wanted to take a moment to point this out because I think a lot of people miss this card. It's just very strong, and I think I'd love to hear some ideas of how this could be used. There's another one later that's like this, and I think like it really catches my eye and makes me want to build around it. I just don't know how. Even I have limits after all. All right, something a little more traditionally strong. Well, I mean, even then, I don't know. Farid, Enterprising Salvager. So Farid's interesting because Farid is kind of like an Artifact Aristocrats, either Commander or Peace. And they have this whole like sacrifice an artifact and you get a bunch of different abilities. Whatever. That's not what's catching my eye. What's catching my eye is this first thing. Whenever non-token artifact you control is put in the graveyard, create a colorless artifact token named Scrap. Scrap doesn't do anything. Scrap is just a token. This is like a Darksteel Ignite, except for it doesn't even have indestructible. It is just a card. It is just a token that stays there. Now, there's a lot of directions to think about this. I think the easiest thing is artifacts can be used for a number of things, whether they can be tapped to help pay for something, or they can be turned into creatures, or they can be given abilities. There's a lot you can do with an artifact once it's on the battlefield. You can count them as permanent. Stop thinking of it as artifacts and think of cards that sacrifice permanents. That could be really good. But I think the main thing I really I want to put out there is like this is a card that effectively says when you sacrifice this permanent, let's say when you sacrifice X, get a token X. And that's an ability that's just really, really powerful. When we think of it, I can't believe I can't remember it, but there's that 3-mana vampire from Rise of the Eldrazi that says whenever one of your creatures, non-token creatures die, you get an Eldrazi spawn. Now, obviously, an Eldrazi spawn is a little better than a scrap, but the Farad comes with more abilities to make up for that. So if you think about it playing in a deck where you're constantly sacrificing your artifacts, Farad represents just getting an extra token free every single time. And this is the kind of doubler I can really get behind, because it's a doubler that is a creature and has a bunch of pretty relevant abilities, from growing Farad to goading creatures to digging through your deck. Now, 2 mana is a lot, but having this in your back pocket, I think it's rather good. Now, obviously, as I said before, there's a very specific kind of deck. You want to use artifacts that can easily come in and out, but I think this is strong. I think this is actually a lot stronger than it seems. And I'm interested to see, because this is definitely a card I will be ordering, I'm interested to see what kind of deck I put it in, is how powerful it's going to be, because it does strike me as rather powerful. Engine cards that produce more, like just take something you want to do, such as throwing, you know, Mycosynth, is it Mycosynth Lattice? No, Mycosynth Wellspring. Let's take a look. Mycosynth Wellspring is a card that says when it enters the battlefield or goes in the graveyard, you get a basic from your deck into your hand. There's also Ichor Wellspring, which is the better one. That's when it enters or leaves, you draw a card. And I think Prize Statue is like another of that cycle, but it's create a treasure. When ETBs or leaves play or goes to the graveyard, you get a treasure. So if you're already doing this and you're already like getting that advantage, Farad just being around and getting you an extra little bonus while you're doing something you already want to do is just really, really powerful. So this to me, I think is very, very strong. And if you're playing artifacts and you are in budget or not budget, I would consider this card. Coming to the last few cards, Thopter Shop is very similar in terms of this is once again an artifact aristocrats kind of strategy, but this is specifically artifact creatures, draw a card. Once again, this is really catching my eye because it is a white card draw ability that is very cheap, and it also has the ability to create the tokens that if they die, you draw a card. Like, that's a really good mix of cards. So once again, if you're in a white artifact creature deck, or once again, Mirror or any other form of small artifact creatures, Thopter Shop is surprisingly good, I think. Like, if we think of welcoming, so like, Tokazia's Welcome is also in this set, right? And it is like $2 to $4. Let's look. I was gonna put this on the list, but I also figured that like literally everyone knows this card. Yeah, $2 to $4. Everyone knows this card, so I don't need to tell you to go and pick that up from the set. But Thopter Shop is 1/10 of the price or less, and it does pretty much the same thing, right? Because it can only trigger once per turn, and instead of playing creatures, you are letting your creatures die. And you are using mana to create replacements. So with that in mind, I think this card is just really, really good. I think you're happy to play this, play this on 3, do some attacks, draw cards as your creatures die, and then later in the game start creating Thopters every turn cycle. I just think this is strong. This is a card that like I had no idea existed, and I'm just really, really impressed by. So obviously at a budget or any form of budget, but I think a lot of non-budget, like mid-level power decks would be interested in this. I forgot to mention this, but all the Brothers War Commander cards initially come in the deck as, like the new cards, as old border, and then you can get the new border with the full art. So there's not any regular bordered versions of these cards. I don't know if that bothers people. I personally don't like the old border on these cards, but the difference is like, what, 8 cents? So I leave it to you. And the last card I want to suggest, this is the Archimandrite. Archimandrite? This is a card that I had it like very early on in my channel. I saw this card, I did a deck review on it, and This is an amazing creature. I want to put this at the end because not only is it a commander card, it is a commander to play with. And if I didn't see this, I feel like a lot of people haven't said this. And this video is approaching almost 30 minutes, so I don't want to go too deep into saying that this card is good. I don't also just say read the card, it's good. But this has 3 very powerful, very relevant abilities on a triple kindred type deck. This is almost like Outlaws, but Outlaws I believe is 5. This is a commander that fits into letting you play the best creatures in 3 different, classes, let's say, because it's not their racial type, it is more it's their class type, right? So you can get artificers, advisors and monks from all sorts of different planes, which I think is really, really cool. But yeah, it is both a card advantage engine at instant speed that can be used the moment this card comes out in play. It is not an overrun effect, but a very good boost effect, and it is just casual life gain. And these abilities work really well together because both advisors and monks tend to want to gain you life, and artificers tend to make more bodies. So you can kind of get really far in this kind of ability, and it's 3 colors, and it's just 5 mana for this. This is a really impressive commander. I really recommend, if you haven't seen this before and you feel the urge to build it, I mean, it's like 10 cents. It's like the full art version is cheaper than the half art version. It's 10 cents. Absolutely. Pick this up and give it a go. What could go wrong? What a really, really cool card. I don't know who they are. I don't know if they're part of the lore. They have such a important name that I'm sure they came up in the original Brothers War, but I have no idea who they are. This is such a cool card. And that's it. That's my review on the Brothers War. I think there's not a lot in here that's worth scouring through, and I'm interested to go, I think, Dominaria, what was it, when we returned to Dominaria, the set before this. I'm more interested to go there to find some more cards, but it's still worth going through these sets. Brothers War was interesting, and it's got some cool stuff in that Commander Zone, especially that Farid. Farid's really caught my eye, so I'll leave it up to you guys to see if there's anything else in there. Please let me know if you find something, or if I missed a very obvious card and that's cheap or just should be picked up. Put it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys think. And I've been enjoying these, so I hope to make another one soon. This is going to take place of one of my videos for the week. I'm just very busy these days, so I can't make 4 videos this coming week. But I hope you guys keep watching, and good luck with the deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.